Welcome, everybody. Good to have you back here at Viva la Evolution. I'm Lori Ashcraft, your host today. I'm speaking to you from Recovery and Resilience Solutions. We are a training and consulting branch of Questwood Behavioral Health. And we're talking about culture shifting. Remember the first time we talked about the man with the water bottle? Someone who has the courage to pick things up. We moved on in the first part of this series to three guys dancing. Remember that? Having the courage to stand up when everyone else is sitting down. And today we're going to take the next step into that, going a little deeper into what it takes to bring about a big shift, a culture change in your organization. And remember, it starts with us. Culture is not in the building. It's not in the landscaping. It's not in the policies and procedures. It's inside each of us. So the challenge is to change ourselves a little bit or a lot, depending on how far we have to go. So today, just to set the stage, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to kind of hit the high points of what's in the narrative, but please read the narrative because it's a lot more coherent than me talking. And in the middle of those high points, I'm going to bring in two guys named Carl. Carl Jung and Carl Sagan. And you'll see how they fit together quite nicely. I know they aren't usually bedfellows, but today they're going to be, and you'll see how that works. I'm going to start with just reading you some quotes by them, and then we'll explain from there. So first, Carl Sagan, here's what he says. We remember him for the Big Bang, the idea that something big happened that created the universe. So here's what he says. He describes the Big Bang as, here you go, an original event that draws the line between the past and the possibility for the future. That's what we're up to here, leaving the past practices that aren't working that well behind, moving into a whole new paradigm of recovery and resilience. And here's a quote from Carl Jung. And the part about Carl Jung we're going to focus on is his ideas about the shadow. So here's what he says. He writes, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The latter procedure, however, is disagreeable and therefore not popular." So, how are we going to bring these two guys together into something that makes some sense for us? Well, maybe I'll give you an example. That might be the best way to go. So we had hired peers in our program, doing quite well. Things were going well, but we hadn't added them to our crisis programs. So we thought, wow, that might be a real game changer to have peers there. And the staff that worked there got really resistant. And by the way, a little word about resistance. Just expect it. Don't take it personally. It's just going to be the way it is. And you just have to plan for it. Just use it. Use the energy of it. Remember the resistors and the resonators we talk about? We'll talk more about that today too. So I'm going to give you an example of our own experience of a big bang and a shadow. So we had added peers to our programs quite nicely, having a great time. And then we thought, we could add them to our crisis clinics. We had two huge crisis clinics going at the time. And we got kind of excited about that. And the staff that worked there really got resistant, saying, well, no, they'll get hurt, we'll get hurt. It's not going to work. So we checked with the peers. The peers said, Of course, we'll love to go there. We've been there many times. We're very comfortable there, and we think we can help. So by then we learned to go with the peers. So we were kind of on that track. And about the same time, Gene said, Gene was our CEO. He said, I think we should stop restraining people in the crisis clinics. He'd been to a conference and heard peers talk about how awful it was to be restrained. He says, we're not going to do that anymore. Well, you can imagine the kind of resistance that brought up. All kinds of stories about I could lose my license, our insurance premiums could go up, we'll all get hurt. It went on and on. But Gene said, nope, this is what we're going to do. And we did a lot of things to prepare and to get ourselves to there that I'm not going to go into today. But if at some point you want to know what that is, I'll tell you all about it. Today, let's stay focused on the shadow and the bang. So our shadow was in that crisis center where we were restraining people. That was our big shadow. So we thought, we're going to change that. So that was our big bang. So we've got the two Carls coming together now, right? So it took maybe 6 months for us to get to zero restraint, but we did. And I don't remember why, but for some reason, I got the doctors together and I was talking with them. I think it was that they were bringing in new doctors and we needed to think about how to orient them. I'm not sure. And I got around to saying, congratulating them on getting to zero restraint, because that was a big deal, a very big deal. And I said, how'd you do that? And they looked at each other and they looked at me and they looked back at each other and they looked at me and they said, we couldn't have done it without the peers. Oh. That was such a beautiful moment. Anyway, that was the big bang and the shadow coming together. Now, I just want to give you a little heads up here. Once you get through using your shadow to fuel your big bang, and you have a big result, you're going to want to rest on your laurels and be ready to be complimented. And you can do that for a few minutes. But now's the time that you really need to step up and hold that line and start coming up with creative ways to sustain it and to move forward. Now you've cleared the deck. There's room for brand new ideas, brand new ways of doing things. You've got a wonderful opportunity now. Stay with it and make it happen. I just want to warn you, there will be resistance at this point. And I have a list here. I want to read this to you. It'll sound kind of like this. Okay. Here's something they'll say. You might be saying this yourself. I don't know. Can't we just change the forms instead of doing other things? We'll just change the forms. Here's another one. Do we have to look at who we're being? Can't we just adjust the work a little bit? Here's another really good one. Besides, we're already doing this. I can't tell you how many times I walked into programs talking about recovery, and they're like, we do that. We already do that. And I say, well, let's look at your outcomes. The outcomes did not reflect the practice. So they and I both at that moment knew they weren't doing it. But that's the first thing that comes up. We're already doing this. Here's another one. And anyway, this might be how it works for you folks, but we're really different. We're very unique. We can't just copy you. I mean, thanks for the offer, but no. We have to build our own way, and it'll take decades. That's another very common one. Here's another one. Well, we have too many regulations, way more than anybody else, and our board of directors is very conservative, and our funding source dictates a very prescribed method for doing everything. And besides, our doctors will never go along with this. I just want to tell you, doctors will be the strongest supporters once they understand what you're doing. Let's see what else we have here. Oh, we don't have any funding to do this. And by the way, the people we're serving, the patients, they call them the patients, well, they're a lot sicker than everybody else's patients. It won't work on our patients. Let's see what else. Well, that's what I've got on my list. So that's what you can expect. Well, you probably get even better ones. Those are just kind of the regular ones, but probably get a lot more creative resistances than those, but you'll get it. So be ready for that. And then here's another thing to be ready for. These are other voices. These might be the voices in your head, or they might be the voices of your colleagues, but you'll start to hear these voices. These are people who are now ready to move forward. They get the Big Bang happened. They're ready to take their next steps. But here's what you have to help with. They're going to say, but we need to go very slowly and carefully. Or they'll say, we got to be really careful. We got to be really careful. Or they'll say, let's start with something small. If we start with something small, we'll be sure to be successful. So to all those three things, no. Do just the opposite. Do not go slow. Emerson said, when skating on thin ice, our safety is in our speed. So keep up the momentum. Momentum will carry you through bad spots because you've already got it going. If you start and stop and start and stop, you're wasting energy. And if you go slow, you won't have enough momentum to keep things going. Be careful? No. This is a time to get out there and make mistakes. They'll be your teachers. And don't worry about getting it right. Don't worry about looking good. Just keep exploring and coming up with creative new ways to do things. And by all means, don't make it little. Make it big. If you make it little, if you pick a little shadow, no one will even know you did anything. It has to be at least middle size, and big would be best. Pick a, like we did. Let's not do restraints. That's a big shadow. Pick a big shadow. Because if you pick a big shadow, you can look back and say, poof, we did a big thing. We did it. And we can keep doing it. So be careful of those things. Those are things that almost always come up. Yes, next I want to show you this video of Jim and me again. And you'll get more detail on what I just told you, a little more depth, a few more interesting things, because Jim asks really good questions. And then we'll carry on from there. So here's a video of Jim and me talking about culture shifting at this point in the game.
Hi, Lori, and welcome back.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah. So in our last session, you had referenced a lot of changes that you introduced. What were some of the reactions that you got from staff and the people that you worked with?
Well, that's kind of a I've got to answer that question on 2 or 3 different planes.
Sure.
Let me back up a little bit about hiring peers. We just had a hunch that if we added peers to keep in mind, we didn't know what a peer was. We didn't know anything. But the idea of adding people to the workforce who had been a service user really appealed to me. Yeah. And I think part of the appeal was it was a living demonstration to the rest of the staff that these people had a lot to offer and that they could recover. Because that was hard to get that message to. It's always hard to get people to believe someone can recover when they've never seen recovery. And trust me, they won't see recovery if they aren't doing recovery services. So they don't do the service, people don't recover, and then they say, people don't recover. People can't recover. But if they start doing recovery services and they see people recover, then they get the vision of recovery. Well, we didn't have that vision yet. Our staff didn't. So I just had this intuition that adding peers to the workforce would be a way to create evidence. I couldn't have told you it this way then because I didn't have the words for it. It was more of an unconscious, preconscious, intuitive thing. So we got this little grant, $20,000. We hired some peers. Then we trained them, and then we hired them. And they started changing us, as I mentioned. So what were the staff reactions to this? We didn't know how to train the staff to create the container for peers. So we just had this head-on collision.
Yeah.
The only thing that mitigated it was our attitudes and our trust in the peers and belief in the peers. So staff would kind of get it and go along with it. And early on, I started realizing that I could almost see staff in two different ways. There were the resonators and the resistors.
Mm-hmm.
And the resonators were people who got it right away. They'd been thinking this already. No one had said it out loud, but they kind of knew it could happen, and they were on board. The resistors were the folks that, even though they might have been trained 40 years ago, would say, I got trained this way, and this is the truth. And this is the right way to do it. Never mind that it's not working that well, but they would cling to those old ideas tenaciously. And they saw any change in that as a compromise. It was, you were dampening down the truth by doing it differently. So that's what we were up against, those two groups of people. It didn't take long to see that the resistors, once they were exposed long enough, became the strongest supporters. So I got to where I didn't worry about the resistors because I knew they were either going to leave and go somewhere else,
Right.
or they were going to get on board in a really strong way. So that's kind of the process that was going on. But the stories that would come up were really interesting. And we explain this in a lot more depth in the blog, the matching blog to this podcast. So people can read all about that. But it's just classic. Whenever you bring about, whatever the change is,
Sure.
our initial reaction to change is always no. And then we kind of have to warm up to it and figure it out and see how it's not going to hurt us. And then go in either pouting or praising the process. So we had all of that. And the peers continued to question us and help us get it right. They continued to tell their stories.
Wonderful.
And that's what changed the staff. And as I say, culture changes within.
Yes.
So as staff got over that clinician's dilemma thing, of where you never see recovery so you don't think it happens,
Right.
as they got over that and began to see it, then they could really support and promote it. Then the whole culture shifted dramatically
Wonderful.
and exponentially once that, it's the tipping point. And the more peers we added, the easier it was. This doesn't mean that peers were perfect,
Sure.
that we never had any problems. We had a lot of problems. But because we'd gone through the internal change, we were willing to work through those. And if we had to let somebody go, we knew how to let them go in a way that didn't disrupt their recovery process, or ours. So that's kind of the initial process that we went through. It was that, again, in an attempt to change the culture so we could support the peers changed the culture.
That's wonderful.
Yes.
And I love, there's almost like a law of attraction here. When the
A
people
little bit, yes.
who didn't understand recovery or didn't have exposure to recovery by not having worked with a peer, now they've been exposed to it, they start seeing the universe that is inclusive of the work that peers do and recovery in general.
And some people couldn't do it.
Sure.
They just left the organization.
Well, perhaps they had a lot invested in their
They did.
education
They
and
did,
their view
yeah.
of the world.
They might have changed later.
Right.
But they weren't ready for it then. And they had all kinds of stories about it. It might affect their licensing. They might get hurt, blah, blah, blah. But by then, other people heard about what we were doing, and we had more people applying for jobs than we ever had. And they were the right people. They were people that wanted to get on board with the recovery process.
Wonderful. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. And the most challenging area we had in adding peers was, you might guess, crisis services. And I remember the point where we thought, this is really going well. We can introduce this to our crisis programs. I'm going to have Gene talk about that at some point because he was right there on the ground with the whole process in crisis. But crisis was where, that was our closet where we kept our less attractive things. Because crisis is a place where you think you have to use force. You think you have to manage everything. And so you start being guided by your need to control and manage instead of your heart. Now you still have to control and manage some things, but when it guides you, then you miss the point of everything. You miss the whole opportunity.
That's a subtle but very important distinction, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Keeping the heart in the forefront. And,
Yes.
And your...
Yes, what are you listening to when you make your fears
Right.
or your heart? And I'm not just saying to throw everything out and be Pollyanna.
Right.
But you have to move carefully through that territory if you want to keep learning and growing. So I think that's where we can leave this part on culture. And something that you and I know is that culture is not one and done.
Right.
Culture is a daily nurturing of a way of being.
Yeah.
And so we'll have our next one will be on, in this series, will be on sustaining a recovery culture.
So we look forward to that. That's going to be really exciting to talk about sustaining a recovery culture because
I
that's
think
such
it'll
an
be
important...
helpful to people, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jim.
I want to share my mom's spirit with you because she gave me such an amazing gift that serves me even today. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about her, and then I'll tell you about the gift. So my mom was Cherokee Indian, and this was during a time when it was not a good thing to be a Native American. It was a bad thing. In fact, most people who had that heritage didn't talk about it. But my mom did. She didn't seem to care about it. Anyway, she grew up on a kind of a dirt farm just at the edge of the reservation. And her mom died when she was 10. And then her dad died when she was 14. She had 4 siblings, and they had to figure out how to survive. And my mom got a job as a live-in maid with a family. This was near Bakersfield, California. So anyway. And the good thing that came out of this live-in maid thing is that she learned how to cook. And her next job was working as a waitress in a little cafe restaurant up out of Bakersfield. And after a few months, the little cafe went belly up. The operators walked away from it. So I don't know how my mom got this idea, but she went to the owner of the building. She said, I think I can do this. I think if you'd let me try, I think I could. I shouldn't have any money, but never mind. And somehow, she could be very persuasive. Somehow, he agreed to front her the inventory for the first week. So she got everything ready, started off that week, and by the end of the week, she'd earned enough money to pay him back. And it was because people were lined up around the corner to come to her little cafe because she was a great cook and great at being she was like a bartender without a bar, just got close to everybody. And so that was about her. Now here's what she gave to me. I'm between the age of like 4 and 6, that in that zone. And I think I probably already had the seeds of the depression and anxiety that haunted me most of my life. And so I would come to Mom whiny and pouty, and she'd put her arms around me and just hold me really close right here on her chest. Too long, because I remember getting squirmy. And then she'd back up and she'd take my face and she'd say, "Honey, you've got to stop being a scaredy cat." Sometimes she'd say fraidy cat. "You got to stop being a fraidy cat. Now go on back out there and do whatever it was you were doing and stop being a fraidy cat." So I just want to pass that on to you. I want to pass that big hug on to you. Hug you until you squirm. And then I want to look at your little face and say, "Don't be a fraidy cat. You can do this. Yeah, you can." So take your shadows, fuel a big bang, and move ahead. It'll be hard, but it'll be really fun. And next week's going to be great because a lot of you know Chris Martin. Chris and I have been work partners for 25 years. I just adore him. And he will be here next week because we're going to talk about how to sustain a recovery culture. And he is a master tool builder, and he is going to tell you about a variety of tools he's developed that can be used to sustain a recovery resilience culture. So I hope you come back next week because you're going to love it. And if you don't know Chris, you're going to love him too. So see you soon, my friends. Take care.